Good morning, Jenny.
Who's that?
I don't know.
I think it was Michael. Michael got on first this time.
There we go.
All right. How are you today?
Good. I'm excited to talk to Mary. This is a subject near and dear to my heart that we have personal experience in from my brother's high school education 20, 25 years ago.
What? You didn't tell me this. This is something new that I don't like hearing. What's that?
Well, there was a coach that was brought in. He was like a weightlifting coach, and he came in and he started wanting to do training sessions with the boys after regular football was over, just more weightlifting, things like that. So he built a gym at his house. He brought these kids into his house and they were working out. And then all of a sudden, he's like, hey, we need to take showers, and he started, molesting these boys. Yeah. And what happened is, my dad, for whatever reason, he just said, hey, I don't like this guy. I don't like what's happening here. So he wouldn't let my brother go. So my brother wound up not going. But the boys that did go, they did get molested. And it came out, years later, one of the boys in the families came forward. They were completely villainized, and they actually had to, they had to change schools. They had to actually leave this school because the administration and they were just completely vilifying the family and everything. They supported the coach, vilified the family. And then, years, it took years. There was years of trauma on that boy that came out and blew the whistle. And, but anyway, he's a family friend of ours. And I mean, it's something else, but this is the problem. The predators and the pedophiles, they go where the kids are. We've said that multiple times. So I'm so glad we have someone like Mary with Visit blowing the whistle, because this is a long-standing good old boy practice, it seems like, in Oklahoma, and her article just nails it. I mean, absolutely nails it.
Well, I want to, before we bring her on this morning, I want to talk about something just briefly. I won't go on a huge rant, but I'm not promising anything, but I'm thinking I won't. We'll see. So this is Libs of TikTok. And this is, so the woman who Ryan Walters put on his textbook committee. And I think I would like to point out right where we are, right now, right here. At the end of 2023, Libs of TikTok exposed the now infamous Oklahoma drag queen Shane Mernon, who was a principal of a public elementary school. After the story went viral, the public pressure forced Mernon to resign from his position. Do you see anything wrong with that, Michael?
Well, it kind of, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that Redux article, Jenny.
What was that about?
That we broke the transgender story that went nationwide, and you never got any credit on that. So this is the same situation where Mary breaks all of the Western Heights story with Mernon here, and
Libs of TikTok gets results. Public school groomers exposed. Look, she's done some great stuff. But this is lying. This is lying. So what, we have a liar on the school textbook committee or whatever committee it is that I'm really mad about that, because I cannot stand people who take credit for other people's work.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying. don't like that.
Yeah, when you're talking about this kind of information, there's a certain type of integrity that goes along with that, and you need to give credit, where credit is due.
Yep, absolutely. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But just know that if you're following her, yep, it's stealing. Yep, it sure is. So, I don't know. That does lead into trust issues, I think, with people who feel like it's okay to raise money off of the backs of other researchers and other people. So if you're doing fine on your own, because she came to, prominence on her own but now she's gotten to the point where she's going to steal other people's work and call it her own and then try to make money off of it. No, not okay with that.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and that's a big time. That's a big time story. That is a big time story right there.
Yep. And that was V1SUT's blog.
Yep.
She's the one who did that, not Cry Ray Chick, not Libs of TikTok. So there you go. Okay, so we do have our blogger on this morning, and I'm getting ready to unmute your mic, blogger Mary. How are you this morning?
I am well. Good to be back with you folks at Rope. Always appreciate the platform to review the month's news and talk about big truth and big exposure. Love to dive in. Let me tell you, we started a series yesterday, and I will want to spend most of our time on that. But there's exactly what you were talking about. And Michael, the story you just shared seems to be the rule about whistleblowers. And it's been an honor to give whistleblowers a place in Oklahoma public education to be able to speak out, because there's much of that. So we'll get to that. But there is one story, because we are back in an election year, that I just want to touch on before we do that. I don't want it to get lost. I think there's a hardworking Oklahoma family of job creators that are caught in political lawfare. And I just want to encourage people to go and read what we've written about this. We've been writing about this for a couple of years. And as all of the big narratives that come spewing out of the local legacy media in unison, 2 years later, suddenly things are a little different. So I wanted to touch on that.
Okay.
Let's start with that.
Okay.
The next slide is about Swadleys. And for those of you who don't know about Swadleys, which you probably do if you live in Oklahoma, they are a local chain of family-started barbecue restaurants. They are an organization that is unabashedly Christian. They say that they are a mission disguised as restaurants. Sterling reputation in the state until they stepped into state contracts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Recent news, Swadley's has sued the Department of Tourism and Recreation. That happened on February 5th because they are due a lot of money from the state for the restaurants that they opened to revive the state park system. Just 3 days, we put out a story the following day, excited that they were fighting back for themselves, and we'll get into that a little. And then February 8th, just 3 days after the suit, Attorney General Gettner Drummond indicted 3 of the men on charges. So timing's kind of interesting. If you go back and put context to this story, this is lawfare to win elections, or at this point, a cover-up of unscrupulous tactics that they use to win elections.
So let me ask you a question. Let me just break in here 1 second. Do you know about Class Wallet?
No, please tell.
So Class Wallet was a vendor that was used to distribute the federal COVID education funds.
Oh, yes.
And it was done through the Secretary of Education's office. Was it while Ryan was Secretary of Education, or was it while he was at? Okay.
No, his secretary went through Every Kid Counts.
Yeah, right. And they funneled that money through Every Kid Counts into Class Wallet, and a whole bunch of it just didn't go where it was supposed to go. And Cindy Bird, our state auditor inspector, found that out. So the first thing that happens is the state administration sues Class Wallet. And Drummond has said now twice, he said it twice, that he will not allow that lawsuit to go forward because Cindy Byrd had irrefutable evidence that this was done between the Secretary of Education's office and Every Kid Counts. So, and the way that was created. So you do wonder when you hear somebody saying, well, we're going to sue these people. Well, and it's the state. Is this, are we throwing this down as a political challenge, or is it a reality?
Very good point. And when you draw a line between the sides that our elected officials always seem to fall on, it doesn't necessarily fall between Republicans and Democrats anymore. We very much have a uniparty in control in Oklahoma. And I think you can track those lawsuits based more on their efforts and goals than you can on traditional party lines.
Yeah.
So if you flip to the next slide.
Oh, sure.
This part quickly. So this is where it all started. And a lot of times the media doesn't want to give you context. So when Governor Stitt came into office, there was a big effort to sort of upgrade the state's image. We got new logos, there were billboards, new signs coming into the state if you're driving on the highway, those kind of things. And one of the places that they started to focus on in 2020 was the state parks. So the state parks were in massive disrepair.
Yes, they were. From somebody who's used them for many years, yes, they were.
Agreed. So if you wanted to rent a luxury cabin, this is sort of what you would get.
Yep.
At that point. And food services in the state parks were maybe a glorified snack stand. That was about it. Attendance at the state parks, which are the state parks and lake life in Oklahoma, it's the biggest draw we have in tourism. And they were down chronically year over year. We had 16 parks at risk of closure at this time, and the state was losing over $1.6 million a year. So these are not revenue generators. These were revenue suckers of the taxpayer dollar. So what they did was they put out to a list of 10 targeted restaurateurs a potential to bid for a contract to come in, refurbish restaurants, build restaurants, have some place that would be destination oriented and upgraded for people to come. All 10 of them refused to bid. And you can go back. There's a recent article that we published on February 6th that then links back to our earlier coverage. And there are quotes from like the entrepreneur that runs City Bites. He basically said, can't do it, can't make a profit. Seasonal businesses, parks are a mess. Nobody's going to touch this, not with a 10-foot pole. Then Swadley's popped up and said, you know what? This is important. We need to do this. We need to fix our state parks. And they jumped in. So the bids they put out to that list in January of 2020, Swadley's jumps up, not even on the list. And in March of 2020, they end up in a contract to take on this work. So think about March of 2020. March of 2020 was when everything shut down. Mm-hmm. And if you know anybody in construction, everything tripled in cost. I mean, lumber literally tripled in cost. Supply chain issues were unmanageable. You just couldn't get some things. But despite that, in the middle of all of this, somehow this organization went above and beyond and made it happen. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit of that, just so people get some context. This is Beavers Bend State Park. The Foggy Bottom, that's what they called the restaurants, the chain that they created for the state parks, opened up. They did 6 of them in 2020 and 2021. Some of them were open in a matter of months during this insane time. They staffed them. They had everything up and going. The reviews, if you go back and look, are fantastic. People were talking about how now the state parks are a destination just for a meal.
Oh, wow.
And things were on the up. If you'll take a flip, this happens to be the one at Beavers Bend. This is the one at Lake Murray State Park, which my family and I used to frequent Lake Murray State Park. We're big campers, hikers, outdoors, lake people. We stopped going because it was so bad there. You couldn't even use the campground bathrooms. The last time I went in to try to take a shower in one of the campground bathrooms, there were dirty diapers stacked in the corner. this upgrade, when you look at it, is so phenomenal. And it is such a rare example of taxpayer money going to something that people actually want to be involved in. So traffic increased even off season, and things were great. All the politicians are bragging. This is some big victory. And then if you'll flip to the next slide, here comes an election year. And in this election year, certain folks were aiming to unseat certain other folks, as in every election year. And I just want to go shortly into the politics behind this. There was a group called the Oklahoma Project, who, if you dig back through the data and the dark money, which Jenni, you are so apt at doing, you'll see that there's a group in the middle called the Falcon Pack. So the Oklahoma Project pops up, and they start spewing 30-second spots attacking incumbent Governor Stitt and the incumbent Attorney General John O'Connor. It's very clear that with their messaging, they have two goals. These guys have got to go. So there are all these different narratives. They do one that is Oklahoma's the worst, how we're 45th in education, which is so interesting because the person who flipped from Republican to Democrat that was running against Governor Stitt was the two-time state superintendent of education, Joy Hoffmeister, yet they're blaming Governor Stitt for us being 45th in education. Spending on the governor's mansion, which if you know anything about the governor's mansion, it was in huge disrepair. They spent $2 million on it. But what they don't tell you is they also came up with this Friends of the Governor's Mansion, and they began renting out for events to get that mansion self-sustaining financially, where it paid for itself. So they leave out every bit of context. One of the narratives in this was Swadley's. So Swadley's got caught up in this political lawfare from this group. Oklahoma Forward is the main contributor to this Falcon Pack, which then feeds into the Oklahoma Project, which were behind these spots. When you look at it, there's a woman named Danielle Ezel from Heartland Campaigns. She's the pack shifter. If you go look in the Oklahoma Ethics Commission, these packs just rotate for whatever purpose the dark money wants to use them for. So she was behind that Falcon Pack. And at one point, they just lost $219,000 from their biggest funder, which was Oklahoma Forward, which I thought was really interesting in their reporting. So I started to look into Oklahoma Forward back then. This is all in the article. Oklahoma Forward's run by a man named Brian Ted Jones. He is the cannabis industry attorney of Oklahoma. By the time we got down to the bottom, 95% of this money from the Oklahoma Project is cannabis money that's now into political lawfare here and is using the Swadley's people as a bludgeon in politics. So here's what they said about Swadley's. They said that this was a personal friend of Governor Stitt's, this was an inside job, all of those kind of things. I could never find any evidence of that. The evidence they had of that was one picture where it looks like Stitt and either Stitt and some other folks from the state or Stitt and his family, someone. They were at one of the state parks, happened to be there. He was in like I'm hiking clothes. And they stopped in to eat, complimented the restaurant, stepped back to take a picture with someone from Swadley's and say, you all have done a great job. That was all of the evidence that they were using on this. So they began to attack Stitt. You've got to know that this is cannabis money. And our current attorney general, who's then running for his spot, is heavily involved with, on the board with, Blue Sky Bank, has a financial interest in Blue Sky Bank. Blue Sky Bank is the largest financier, lender to the cannabis industry. They have an entire line that is cannabis financing. If you go look on their website, they have an entire page that is just to cannabis businesses. So there are a lot of ties here that are extremely questionable that Cannabis money is tied to the person that decides who does and doesn't get indicted in our state at this point. And he was running for office at the time. You should probably also know about Trey, which his real name is John, and Jerry Richardson. Yeah. Now they own SAGAC Public Affairs and GR Pro, which this is part of the political consultant class that runs this state behind the scenes. They pull the strings of candidates. They work dark money in to back candidates, and they make a lot of money at it. Those folks, the Richardsons, also own integrity testing laboratories. So integrity testing laboratories, if you own a cannabis business, you are state required to regularly test your cannabis for strength, what's in it. It's supposed to be a safety issue. These folks own the testing. The people that craft the political messaging that you see on your television make money off the cannabis industry and state required testing. So it gets a little muddy here, I would say. So we move into this election year, and now these ads start to go up, and suddenly Swadleys, who had worked their tail feathers off and pulled off this miracle during COVID to revive the state parks through these restaurants, David Prater, who was our former Oklahoma County District Attorney, suddenly requests a forensic audit of Swadleys. I won't go too much into that because there's too much politics for you to handle. But if you'll take a look at those articles and link, you'll start to understand. Jenny, you keep shaking your head because I feel like
yeah, I've got so much I can say about that, but let's move on because I know there are a lot of people who really want to hear about the coaches.
Yes. So obviously the media jumps on this story. They're singing in unison. They're slamming Swadleys about this. This is huge corruption. And one of Drummond's first acts as Attorney General after he's inaugurated is to take over this specific case with the OSBI. It feels a lot like we're covering our political wrangling that got us into office. Yeah. And if you'll just go to the last slide here. I just want to tell people about the recent suit. So Swadley's files against the State Department of Tourism, and the state owns them $2.5 million. It's a complicated contract, so I encourage you to go to the article. Swadley's is claiming they delivered almost $12 million more in net value to this than the state. So it doesn't sound a whole lot like these people have profited. It sounds like they left in the red. If you look at the indictment 3 days later by the Attorney General, it's very shaky and repetitious. It is like, we have this one invoice indictment. We turned around twice with the invoice in our hand, another indictment. We filed this invoice with the state, another indictment. It seems like they wanted as many counts, there are 6 counts in it, that they could trump up from one act. And when you get down to the bottom of it, it's about 2 used smokers. We're talking about barbecue, that 30% additional was added to an invoice. If you've been around the construction industry and construction suppliers, what they're not telling you, and what is most telling about this, is the 30%. This is a well-known industry standard with suppliers. And people who aren't in construction are going to be surprised about this. People in construction or materials in construction will just nod their head yes. What happens is, in almost all cases, there's a 30% that goes back to the contractor for that contractor choosing to come to that supplier for business. Now, there's discounts. If you walk in to buy flooring for your house, you're going to pay a much higher price. If your contractor sends you in, you're going to get a significant discount because now you're on a professional standard of pricing. But 30% is standard that goes back on these invoices to the contractor in thanks for their business and bringing their business to that supplier. If you don't believe me, go do some research. That's a very real thing, and no one's telling you that. And sometimes as a contractor, you don't even know that's the standard until the invoices land in the office and you realize that they've added a percentage, and that's what they always do. So just thought you all should know. The last slide is just a statement that I thought was really interesting from Swadley's. And they call this a David and Goliath battle. And they ask people to hold judgment as this lawfare plays out and they have a chance to defend themselves. There's a lot of shaky connections here. And I would challenge any journalist in the area to look into the Manhattan Project, who was involved in about a third of the Capitol renovation. They gave a lot of money to a few candidates, and they were paid $153 million, which is more than twice what they bid for the project.
Yes, because they had to just keep doing things. Oops, now we have this. Oops, now we have that. It was kind of a joke in the Capitol, I think, at the time.
I wonder if the OSBI shouldn't take a look at those invoices and see if we don't have some 30% in there as an industry standard. But that's all I have to say about that.
Well,
food for thought. And now let's talk about our series. This was the first article yesterday in the Coaches Rape Club, which is our latest investigative series. It was planned to be a 3-part series, but the last 24 hours, so much information has been flooding our publication email about similar situations as Michael described, about abuse at the hands of public school coaches, teacher coaches, that has gone on for years, and they've been quietly allowed to slip out of districts as accusations get too hot and to move to other districts. And we've had more.
I just want to point out, though, this is what you talked about, too, in the Shane Murren case. You know, what you were uncovering at Western Heights. It was the same kind of thing. These people just get moved around to different places.
It's interesting that you say that, because when Shane Murren, for those who haven't followed it, who was an active drag queen, he had prior child porn charges that he was able to get dismissed in not a way that says the evidence wasn't there. And the evidence was there. And a judge even said that he should never be around small children. That's in the court records. So what's interesting is he was at Stillwater Schools at the time. He stepped out of education for a few years to pursue his drag queen pageant and entertaining. And he was hired back into education at Little Axe Public Schools. So these stories actually do connect.
Wow.
That was the place that led him back into elementary education. So,
for Pete's sakes.
Yes, that's not even in the article, but because there's just so much information to cover here. So I'll tell you just a little bit about, I know you all have read it, but in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there were a group of male coaches at Little Axe Public Schools, which, you know, they graduated about 100 kids at a time there, to give you an idea, east of Norman, about 30 minutes. It was a bit of a dark fraternity is how I would describe it. They were abusing teen girls, and unlike a lot of other cases that I've investigated, these were overachievers. These were star athletes that were targeted. These were girls who overwhelmingly had family support, but their families had placed total trust in these coaches because, you know, sports are so much of a defining factor for these kids. And these parents wanted them involved in these really positive things. In this case, the trust was unjustified.
Well, and I'm just going to interrupt really fast and say this. I mean, I went on a whole rant one day about public school sports. I mean, we've got to get we've got to get sports out of public schools and into, I mean, they can create these organizations that they do alongside, just like homeschoolers do. But this is just, you're indebting your property for every bond that they have to run for a new stadium. And this is not education. It's not. It has nothing to do with education. Nothing. If you want your kid, you could send your kid to be a missionary. You could send your kid to do anything, play sports. It doesn't have to be in public schools, and the taxpayers don't have to keep forking over money for this, especially when we know that this kinds of stuff happens frequently.
Well, the nature of the relationship between a coach and a student allows for an additional opportunity for exploitation. These kids want to do well at this. Sometimes they see their future hooked to this. Sometimes their families see that they move on to the next level of education with this, and they enjoy it. And they spend an incredible amount of time outside of the regular school day with these folks. So it is an area that definitely is ripe for abuse. And as Michael said, in this case, in Little Axe at the time, people did come forward and they were discredited. We talk about that in the article. The abusers were defended. And then finally, when the heat just got too hot, and you can only have so many times you're accused of this, that even the administration can't let it continue, they would let them quietly step down and move on to another district where there'd be a whole other batch of girls who were at risk. So this continued until now. And in many cases, these men have been promoted. And we're talking now about teachers, coaches, principals, and superintendents.
And here we have, so Angela Grunwald, who's the superintendent at Admin Public Schools, is just made an announcement yesterday that she's going to go to the Supreme Court. She's going to spend taxpayer dollars on an attorney, an organization of attorneys who is just keyed into getting money from taxpayers to sue for the school, not for parents, not to help parents, but just to perpetuate the school cycle, right? And she's going to take this to the Supreme Court to keep two books from being removed from their public library.
Now, and the books, just so that people know if they haven't read the books, they absolutely contain pornographic content. Just because there's not a drawing or a picture does not make it appropriate within a public school.
And here's what kills me. And this is what I talked about on Crisis in the Classroom. You have parents out there defending this, saying, well, I read that and it was a great book and I thought it was wonderful. You are an adult. My God, what do you not understand about that? You needn't be a parent because you don't understand the relationship parent to child, adult to child. These people make me so aggravated. A child is not ready for that content. A child is not ready for that content. And you parent by saying how much you loved that book and it's just great for your kid. You're the one ruining your kid. And then when you double down and get behind a superintendent who intends to ruin kids, you make it worse.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting is that
was I clear enough about that? I'm just curious.
It is. And the distortion of the relationship between adult and child is really not different than that of an abuser.
And that's a good point.
Sexual abuse. And in this case, these men that were doing these things, it really is not different in distortion. That there is, we've lost the collective agreement that protecting the innocence of children is critical to their healthy development.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So that is, all of this is really relevant. But so back to Little Axe. So these things happen in 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s. And these men are allowed to slip away to now what is over 20 districts in our state have been affected by this, whether they know it yet or not. But
there's Little Axe in relation to Oklahoma City. So just in case you don't know.
Exactly. So every story has a hero, and this story has a hero that I've come to respect greatly. Her name is Ashley Rowland. And very courageously, she came forward in 2020. She reported her rape by a teacher coach to law enforcement. And also, let me say this about that. If you're not aware, Oklahoma changed its law about statutes of limitation for child sexual abuse for both criminal and civil cases. That was a very good thing. It pushed it to say that you can report this up until 45 years old and still take legal action.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
Well, there's a caveat.
Yeah.
What?
Unfortunately, district attorneys must use the law of the land at the time of the crime.
No.
People don't understand this, and I didn't understand this until I began digging into this and talking to this courageous woman. So her hands were tied. This crime happened in 2002. So until we move along to enough years that we're running current and we get to the point where we change that law is not helping. And it is very common that child sexual abuse, number one, isn't reported at all. And number two, isn't reported until someone is well into adulthood. Abusers are excellent at silencing victims. Systems.
But can I make a point there though too? So let's sit on that 1 second. Why is it so easy for abusers to silence victims? Because of this reason. Because the victims are children.
Exactly.
Are children who don't have the worldview or the experience to be able to stand for themselves and say, I don't think that's right. Because that kid brain is in there going, well, I don't know. Is it he's saying this? And I'm not sure what to do. This parents who think it's okay for your kids to read inappropriate material is the reason why we say it's not. Because a child doesn't have the worldview or the experience that an adult has to be able to look at the adult in front of them who they are indoctrinated into believing that they should have some respect for, right?
Yo, think about a coach. What did parents say to their children about their coaches? Do what they say, work hard, give 100%. That makes this feel very ripe for abuse. And also,
and the emotional bond that's tied. I mean, the emotions are so high in sports, and those coaches perpetuate that, and they count on those emotions. And I mean, there's serious bonds emotionally, and that's another part of that whole deal.
Correct. And that turns into a trauma bond. And for those who have suffered child sexual abuse, they understand trauma in itself is a silencer. So many of these young women, actually all of these young women, because I've talked to many of them, moved into survival mode in their young adulthood, just trying to process this, trying to move into normal relationships, trying to move forward. So there are a lot of reasons that they're silenced. That being said, I want to say that Ashley Rowland and also Casey Yoakum, who was the hero of our Wetumpka series.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yes,
you're
about
exactly
a male
right.
abuser there.
Right.
They both are adamant about fighting to completely eliminate statute of limitations for child sex crimes.
And good for you, Ashley, who's watching us on Rumble this morning.
Excellent. Hi, Ashley. So Ashley, because she could not prosecute any longer, began contacting the OSDE in 2020, mid-2020. They essentially told her, we don't have an investigator just left. They made some promises about, oh, yes, we're investigating. She had a particular contact in their Office of Legal Affairs. She has all of those communications. Ashley Rowland is an excellent researcher and documenter, which makes her a double hero.
Well, I noticed that in your article. I was like, she's like recording phone calls and writing stuff down and you go, girl. I mean,
very sharp, very intelligent young woman.
Look at what Karen just said, because this is Karen is echoing what you've said. So the kid reports it, and I hate to use kid in that terms. The young lady reports it, and then the town goes, "That's not true. He wouldn't do that." And then anybody else who wants to say anything, how are they going to come forward when everybody else all of a sudden is now making them out to be the bad guy?
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to do that.
Exactly. And there were students and parents that came forward. We have statements from some of those, and they specifically talk about how they came forward. They went to the school board as a group, and they were shunned. They were essentially shunned. They told them that they were troublemakers. This emboldened the perpetrator. One of them talks about how then he would not tell her or her mother if a game time changed so that they would show up late. And then eventually that particular player and mother, the accused abuser here, ended up screaming at them publicly during a game. She quit the sport forever and said, "This is why we homeschool," essentially. So Ashley Rowland is fighting through. No, go ahead.
But that's another point I really, really want to make. We're going to have Janice Danforth on again here pretty soon, because she to talk about the school surveys that she's really been, hitting. The problem with kids too is also this: how many times when my kids went to public school did I would say, "How was your day?" And they go, "It was fine." Yeah. You are not going to get from your child what happened at school. If certain things happen, the chances of you finding out about that are slim to none. They don't want to get in trouble. They're afraid if they tell you something, they're going to get in trouble. I mean, right now, I wouldn't put my kid in a public school to save their life, because you couldn't save their life. I mean, you would have no idea what's going on.
Agreed.
It's a rare kid who comes home and goes, "Mom, this happened." Rare kid.
Very much so. I think that's an excellent point. So if the OSDE, who was under Joy Hoffmeister at this time in 2020, had taken this seriously, had investigated and had taken action, we wouldn't be here today, but they didn't. So Ashley Rowland they actually suggested to her, "We don't have an investigator. Why don't you just collect evidence and send it to us?" That was after a year of stalling her and her believing that they were investigating. So she did. She began reaching out after truly believing that this was an isolated incident that happened to her. She began reaching out to others and collecting statements. And this is far, far bigger than I think any of the women originally thought. Many of them were shocked when Ashley Rowland contacted them, former classmates, some a little older, some a little younger than her. They all thought they were the only one. So this kind of abuse is masterful. But I'm going to briefly tell you a little bit about Ashley's story that she has bravely shared. So Ashley and a friend who we will call Jane, she is not comfortable yet publicly in media, although she has submitted a statement to the OSDE with her name.
Good lot that'll do her, it sounds like. We'll have to see.
We'll see. We're going to keep hope here. They went to, in 2002, in March, they went with a large group of students down to Padre Island, as a lot of seniors do. Now, Ashley, an excellent student, was actually a junior, but getting ready to graduate early, a year early. So she was young. So they were there, and lo and behold, most of the group had to go back because a lot of them were boys that were baseball players. Yeah. And on the screen, you see their coach. Their coach said they had to be back for practice. Yet the coach and another coach went to Padre Island and followed these girls there. So there was a shift. There was an isolating of them from their peers. And then these girls are at a concert event kind of thing. And these coaches show up and start trying to dance with them. Imagine you're a teen, how overwhelming that would be, how confusing that would be. The girls.
Well, you might even think it was kind of cool, because it's like, hey, my coach is dancing with me. This is kind of funny, I mean,
it takes some time to process.
Yeah.
I think they had very good instincts for as young as they were. At least Ashley did. They separated themselves. They were being pressured to hang out with these coaches. And they said no. And they went to a local McDonald's and sat there to eat. The men pursued them there and pressured them into going back to their hotel, to the extent that the hotel even had a policy, because it's spring break and they don't want hordes of people in hotel rooms having a party, that you had to have a wristband that cost $20 to even get into the hotel. So one of these coaches purchased a wristband for them, and they get into the hotel and they're in the room, and these coaches are pressuring them to drink, very specifically pressuring them to drink, which was realized. And then it went to talking to the girls about how they had communal sex and stripping and thing with other girls in school, and dropping names of other girls in school, which has now been discredited by statements and interviews with those now women. Ashley believes that this was pressure to push the girls into those same acts that evening.
Well, sure.
There was a third gentleman in the a coach, identified as a coach, that was unknown to the girls. Now, this particular coach on the screen, that's Michael Allen. He was currently working at Little Axe at the time. The other gentleman's name is Sean Finch, and he had worked there until very recently, and then had moved on, we don't know why, to a nearby district, I believe Lexington. But he was there. And then this third coach, and Ashley does say in her statement and in interview that this third coach was saying things to them like, don't say those things to the girls. Don't do that. You're going to regret this. That third coach has not been accused of any crime, but is clearly someone of interest as a witness in this situation.
Yeah.
Roland remembers going out to a balcony because the conversation made her so uncomfortable as the child that she was, and following that third coach out to the balcony for a sense of safety. And from there, you can read in the article what happened. She very much believes, and her doctor very much believes, that she was drugged with the drug commonly known as roofie. And she describes very much the symptoms and experiences of someone who has been surreptitiously drugged with that date rape drug, to the extent that her clothes were neatly folded. She does not remember taking her clothes off. She does not remember key details of this. The other girl remembers being on the bed and seeing her on the floor being assaulted. She does not remember any of those things. And she only woke in about the time frame that that drug takes, because her friend was screaming, and her friend woke up also naked with the other coach in the bed. And it is presumed that she was also drugged because she'd urinated all over herself. And one of the things about this drug is that it works on the central nervous system by relaxing all of the muscles. So Roland describes how she could not talk. She woke up very fuzzy for about 5 seconds during the assault. She could not fight back. That is what this drug does. And the drug also causes, we now know, more recent research that I've linked to in the article, it causes gastric and colon injuries. And Roland very much, she had none of these issues before the rape, and suffered greatly after the rape.
That's so sad.
Instantly. So here we have a child coming back, trying to handle all of this. Her mother is the registrar at that school district for a long, long time, including during this time. She cannot tell her mother this is what happens with victims, but she did share with a couple of others, including her boyfriend at the time. And he has now submitted a statement that aligns in detail with some of the things she's saying, about how she believed that she'd been drugged, about how they were looking up symptoms of that drug and what it can do to you at the time as a 17-year-old trying to figure this out.
Well, and here was something interesting too that I thought, because like Karen said a second ago, if a child reports a rape, the whole town turns against them. Well, this girl, Ashley,
Mhm.
was such a good student that she was going to graduate a year earlier. Her boyfriend goes on to be a sheriff. He
Yes,
doesn't go on to be a drug dealer or something. The girl
exactly.
was clearly a good girl in with, good people. I mean, her boyfriend, at the time becomes a sheriff. And he's like, I'll tell you everything about what she told me. I mean, come on.
Exactly. Exactly. This is so different than the pattern with coaches is very different than what we see with others. Usually it's the most vulnerable students. Often they don't have resources. They might not have a father or any parent in the home. They might be raised by grandparents. That's not the case with the girls in this particular story.
Yeah.
It was the exploitation, like Michael said, of the relationship of trust between the coach and the player and the families. Coaches who abuse students groom families.
Lovely.
Yes, for sure. So getting back to what Ashley did next. So Ashley began reaching out after she could not find justice through the OSDE. And let me say very clearly, this is a person who has purity of purpose. She made it clear to everyone at the OSDE, I know now that I cannot prosecute. My goal is to have this person's teacher certification revoked because he's bounced around districts and there are other girls getting hurt, and I want to protect others. There was nothing to gain in this for her coming forward. So I just want to note the bravery here against systems that silence people.
Yeah.
So she came back, she started her investigation, and it took her about 2 years, and she contacted all of these other women. And she collected statements from both victims and witnesses to this pattern. And those were all sent to the Oklahoma State Department of Education in mid-2023. So this formal package of well-researched information was sent to the OSDE, and her hope was to get actions. So that, yes, talk about documenting. That's actually the certified mail certificate from her sending this to, doing all of this work and sending that to the OSDE.
Well, and it seems to me too that maybe we need to see if Ashley would be willing to come on the show even and talk about how she went through these and did these things, and see if, she could educate other parents and other kids about this stuff too, because I think that it seems to me like she would be somebody who would be, possibly interested in doing that, because I feel like it's so important to make parents understand that there are things happening out there that you don't know. You don't know.
You don't know. And I think
When your kid is out of your control, you don't know.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. So hopefully we'll do that. She can have my time anytime. So one thing I do want to talk a little bit about is Ashley's mother, because we have an unusual situation where her mother was inside the district. Ashley's mother's name was Diane Terrell, and she passed away recently. But before she passed away, this is a tough one. For all you mothers out there, this is a tough one.
That was a tough one.
She made notes. She knew the fight that her daughter was in, and her daughter had already started this fight for justice and to protect others. And she made copious notes, which are included in the article, about the changes in her daughter after this happened.
There's Ashley's mom.
And in the immediate medical symptoms that Ashley experienced after this, she tried to hide and work through the ensuing months. And then as starting college classes, her doctor finally said to her, he believed very much that this was from the rape and from the drug that she was given, and encouraged her to tell her mother because her medical situation was serious enough that she needed the support. I'm sorry. So she told her mother about it. And in her mother's notes, her mother documents who she told about this in district administration and when she told them. So the district superintendent at the time was Barry Damrow. He knew. Bobby Hicks, the principal of the high school, he knew. There's some information in one of those recorded phone calls with someone that corroborates that Bobby Hicks, the principal, specifically told those young coaches, you stay away from Padre Island, don't you go. Clearly aware of this pattern and the forethought in what they were doing. So this is where we get into internal protectionism. And I cannot say that these records exist, but even personnel records about internal investigations into any of these kind of activities were destroyed, according to the district, in a tornado. The district's office. I'm not saying if those existed that Ashley would be able to get her hands on them, because this is another one of those problems. Districts will not talk about personnel issues. So anyone committing a crime in the school, the district has sort of put itself out there as not responsible because they can't talk about this. Or their internal investigation focuses as a Title IX investigation, which is about discrimination, not about child sexual abuse and criminal acts. So the protectionism inside this district, I think, is really no different than what we see in places like Kingfisher, where it's physical abuse by a coach, or all of these cases that pop up around the state. It's amazing. The interesting comment from Julia. It's amazing that these people are not in jail. Yes. So those who have the power to stop these things seem to be more focused on stopping a public scandal in the district than protecting children.
So let me just read this part from Ashley's mother's, because this was, everything suddenly made so much sense. Ashley's decisions and behavior, Coach Allen's behavior after spring break, very standoffish. We had a good relationship. His sudden resignation as head baseball coach over the summer. This would be so unusual. He was 25 and a head coach with a winning record. Hello?
Exactly. Yes.
Hello?
And at the bottom of her statement, she goes on to say how the culture in the school presumes and promotes innocence of accusers, because she says she remembers helping him text some documentation about accusations of him sleeping with his softball pitcher in previous years, and that she completely backed him. Everyone thought the mother was crazy of the student and vilified her. So this wonderful woman, who by all accounts was a very loving person who wanted to protect children and her daughter, was definitely subject to the culture inside those school walls among the adults. Okay, where do we go next? We talked a bit about how there were the whistleblowers, and they tried to stop these things, could not. Then we go into, in the article, what happened to these men next? Where did they go? How is this handled? There are, between these two people, they hop districts a lot of times, which is not typical. You see a lot of educators, they may hop districts, but they tend to stay a long time in their schools, particularly in rural communities. And they tend to be people from those communities working in the schools. A lot of them grew up there. This pattern is completely different. We can find no evidence that law enforcement has ever been involved when these men will suddenly step down from a district, resign. You can see on social media where people saying, we don't know what happened. Why would they have stepped down? Parents are left in the dark, and then they just move on. So this particular Michael Allen, Ashley Rowland's perpetrator, He moved on from Little Axe and took a similar step down that summer that Ashley's mother referred to. We had no idea why he left. He was a winning coach, and he went to Hinton. He married during that time to a woman who was a 1996 graduate, also an exceptional basketball player from the Burns Flat area, very exceptional athlete. They had a child, and then during that time, he started a relationship with a player at Hinton, one of his basketball players, who was then 16 years old. And this is where I'm coming to realize the perpetration doesn't necessarily end for some. So that child then became pregnant in the following year, and eventually, just after, literally the day after her 21st birthday, married him. Now, that makes him exempt from prosecution for any of the previous crimes related to that child. They're still married today, and I'm not here to put judgment on anyone's family structure or anyone's relationship, but to translate from a crime into someone being married, it's hard to differentiate.
Well, I think you can say that if you're a coach and you're in a position of authority over somebody who's under 18 and you have sex with that person under 18, you're kind of a scumbag. I don't know. I guess I'll judge on that, because if you are a person of authority over a person and that person is in a public school and you are in a position of power and you have sex with that person, that's not a family structure. That's sexual predation.
It certainly is complicated. And when we know how controlled these women in their statements and their interviews, and they understand how they were silenced and they believed they were the only one, you cannot help think that there is some serious manipulation, and some legal reasons why a man would encourage that. So after that in Hinton, Coach Allen stepped out of public education for a time, and he started a landscaping business with another Little Axe coach from back then. That man's name is Lance Palisano. Lance Palisano, we don't know why he left education at the time, but he did come back in 2010. He coached at Santa Fe South Charter. He was then at Yukon Public Schools, and now he's been at Crooked Oak Public Schools since 2015. So the point here is that this group stayed together in different ways. And as we move farther into their careers, when one would have to step down and be left out of a job because of a pseudo-silent scandal in a town, others in the group would hire them. So the cycle can never stop. If the people who are responsible for protecting children from predators in the school are now promoted to the level where they have sins of the past to cover themselves, or their friends also have sins of the past to cover themselves. And I think this is much bigger in Oklahoma than we ever assumed.
Wow.
So
we all need to go to jail. School board needs to go to jail. All these administrators, all these coaches, until something like that happens, this is going to just be a never-ending cycle. Shame on Hinton for bringing this guy in. Shame on the Little Axe school board, all the administrators. They all knew. They told those coaches, don't you guys be going down there to Padre. I mean, give me a break. They knew what was going to happen.
Well, and it's interesting because the state school board now and Ryan Walters have proposed all new reporting requirements for administrators in school districts related to these kind of things. And of course, those measures are being fought by public education, but they are very necessary. The Awareness system that they've put in place, it's a bit like the VAERS system right now with vaccine adverse effects. if you asked people in medicine before COVID, nurses, doctors, practitioners, how often they'd reported to VAERS, which had been around decades, they would say, what is VAERS most of the time? And what we know is so little of that damage was reported. The Awareness system at the Oklahoma State Department is relatively new, and it allows anyone, me, you, a parent, a student, anyone with concern about a child, about something that has happened within Oklahoma Public Schools, to report that either by name or anonymously. And people don't even know that it exists.
But that's terrible. I mean, that's terrible. Because people could actually report stuff, and then, like Angela Grunwald says, that's just, that awareness system. I mean, it just allows anybody to report anything. Methinks thou doth protest too much. That's what Shakespeare said. I think I'm going to go with that because there is a fine line. So I've been in the classroom before. Everybody who watches knows I've been in the classroom before. I did have a kid who became a problem. And if you just looked at him, he would say, oh, she touched me, or she, I'm not going to say that there aren't kids out there, and there aren't even parents out there who might want to get back at somebody or do something, and they might report something, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because what you do is, if that child comes forward or a parent comes forward and says this happens, you are bound. You are bound ethically and morally to make every attempt you possibly can to prove that that either did or didn't happen. But just going, oh, you're full of it, and that coach is a winning coach, and just be quiet, pull up your big girl panties. That is despicable. There's no other way around it. It's despicable. You people who are in public education, you absolutely have the ethical and moral responsibility to verify that some child isn't being hurt, period. End of discussion. There isn't a but there.
Agreed. Yeah. And what's ironic in this is that when it comes to reporting abuse that may be happening in the family,
they're right there.
Teachers and staff are the number one reporters to the Oklahoma Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline. And I applaud that, because if a child is being harmed, it needs to be reported. But somehow, when the harm is coming from within public education, we have flipped the paradigm. And I'm going to give you a piece of encouragement. In the history of this publication, we have never had as many tips, as many people reaching out and saying, this is also happening in our district, or we know more about this story that you need to know, than we have in the last 24 hours. Good. God is at work. And that's coming primarily from really good-minded educators and school staff who have been silenced. So I don't want to vilify all of teachers, because there's obviously an army out there who has been very concerned and may have been trying, has been silenced, or at risk of losing their occupation in their small town, and their means of support if they speak up about this. So,
honestly, I get that. But, Michael had somebody reporting to him about educators talking to kids surreptitiously on a social media platform that they have, and that person wouldn't go public, and the problem is, I'm sorry. That's got to be between a rock and a hard place, not just proverbial, but literally a rock and a hard place. Do I keep my job? Do I report this? But I'm sorry. If you do not want to save children and protect children, don't be in public school. Don't be around children. If you don't have the backbone to do that, then you need to go find maybe retail or something.
Yeah.
But that isn't a job for you. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, let's face the fact, Jenny, this state worships sports. I mean, that's what matters. And especially when you have a small community that has a winning program in any capacity, that is that's where that protectionism really comes in. I mean, it's so sad because you probably go to the Little Axe academics or Hinton academics, and they're probably below 50% proficiency without a shadow of a doubt. But yet we're going to keep, our winning baseball program or, softball or whatever it is, we're going to keep this guy in here. And that's the whole crux of the problem is, like you said, I'm not against sports in any way. I played all sports in school. I played sports in college. My kids play sports, but at the same time, sports are just sports. I mean, it's not what their life is going to be in any way. I mean, you need to focus on the academic side of everything. And that's where, I do think we need some separation between the actual pursuit of academics and how these sports programs are played out here. But that's, it's part of the good old boys club, and it's always going to be like that here.
You're bringing up this particular series is bringing up so many considerations, and there's so many dynamics at play that are making kids unsafe. I would spread out a little bit more responsibility here in saying that Ashley Rowland and others in other stories who are similar and courageous like her have worked very hard to try to be heard. And the people that are supposed to be hearing them are making it very difficult at more than just the level of the school. I would say journalism has forgotten its role within the community.
Yeah.
No one will touch these stories.
Nope.
No one will touch these stories. And public pressure is what's needed to make our officials who can handle this problem, who could protect children. It's sustained public pressure. You must, if you are a young journalist in Oklahoma, you must not write stories that are popped out there about these things and then go away. You have to come back to it. You have to follow. You have to write the third, fourth, and fifth article until somebody pays attention. Ashley Rowland said to me, why would I have to work this hard to tell people what happened? And I think at every level, we have to look at who's not listening and why. What are they gaining by not listening to these victims?
Yeah.
Well, they get to keep their jobs, and they just get to keep moving around. And clearly their ethics and morals don't play into this kind of thing. They're probably more sociopathic. They just don't really, it's what I want, really wrong and right. I mean, I can work that out. It's, whatever. And unfortunately, I think we're breeding people like this, and parents, again, I'm going to get the big stick out and whack away. So get ready.
Okay.
The this. So my son just told me something the other day that was just, we have this kind of fun thing where in the evening he sits down and when he has 5 minutes between all the things that he's doing, he'll get on Instagram, and if he finds something funny, he'll save it, and then he'll kind of show us later on, and like in the evening he'll attach it to the TV, and we'll go through some of the funny stuff that he's seen. Well, one time there were just like a couple of car crashes that he was flipping through, and I'm like, what is that? And he goes, oh, you don't even want to know. And I was like, oh, yes, I do. You may be an adult, but I still want to know. And he said, basically what happens with Instagram is accidentally, because he's a gearhead, he does cars and computers and all that. And he's a gearhead, and he likes to look at car stuff. And they showed him in his feed, he got a car crash where clearly somebody was killed. And because he got it, meant that they kept showing him stuff like that. And he was like, and I don't even know how to get out of it. I keep reporting him, but they keep showing up. This is what happens. See, when you think that this is a babysitter, oh, they have to have one because they drive and I have to pick them up from sports. And no. There still are flip phones on the market that don't connect to the WWW. I mean, you can literally buy them a flip phone and go, hey, guess what? I have this flip phone and this is what I want for you. And you can call me anytime you want, but you're not connected to the web. This is just bad stuff. And what's happened is it has ruined the emotional, psychological ability for people to determine what's wrong or right. Because when you see stuff like car crashes where people are killed in your feed all the time, it's like, well, now it's just commonplace. Okay, you get desensitized to it. And if you're already prone to looking at girls in bathing suits or whatever, and then they just start showing you more and more and more, you get desensitized to it. And by the way, now all of a sudden you're even looking at more, and now, whoops, it's jumped off of the phone and into real life. And now I see this here, and I'm going to do that because, hey, whatever, I see it all the time. We are not understanding what we have wrought with this stupid thing.
You make some really good points about child development and technology. And in reference to what happened in Little X and proliferated across the state to more than 20 districts, I would say this. Think about 2002 and the ability to exploit that relationship between coach and student to sexually abuse children. Think about now the ability to text with these children, coaches texting, and it's so much easier to go behind parents' backs to develop these surreptitious relationships. Sherry Connolly, who is representative in the House that comes on your program regularly, she has a House Bill 3958 right now. And yesterday it was voted out of committee and to the House, forwarded by a unanimous vote of people from both parties. And what it does is it restricts school personnel, coaches, teachers, anyone from communicating digitally with a student without a parent or guardian present. That's essentially the bill. It's very common sense legislation that needed to happen a long time ago, because the grooming of our children is happening through those devices in most cases. Yeah. So in 2002, not everybody had a cell phone. And some of these girls who I've interviewed, who will talk about more and tell their stories in part 2 and part 3 of this series, talk about these coaches talking to them late at night on their house phone outside of parents' reach, about sneaking them out of their parents' houses in the middle of the night. We're going to talk a little bit about different patterns as we move on in this series. Some of it was drugging and raping. Some of it was seducing children into false relationships for the purposes of sexual gratification. And I think that is more common than we can imagine.
Well, and again, why does this happen? Kids are not adults. I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to get some money together so we can start an actual set of commercials. Kids are not adults, and really hone in on that. And I think, that happened. We're going to have to get off of here in just a second. So I'll try not to do one of my crazy things here where I go on another rant. But I do think we have got to come to the agreement that children need to be protected because society needs to be protected. Mm-hmm. And the more off the rails, if you want to say, the more sexually deviant people get at younger ages, the harder it is for us to put aside the dopamine and think about things rationally and not emotionally. And that's part of the reason, why Kinsey and all the lefties wanted to do all of this stuff involved, with sexual research, because they knew that it could really be a mover of society by pulling people into this dopamine dope, where that's all they think about.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say, just before we hop off here, Jenny, this isn't like just some spontaneous thing that just happens out of the blue. These people are predators. They're deviants. They put in planning upon planning upon planning about how they're going to contact these girls, what they're going to do. I mean, this is not like it's just spur of the moment. Oh, it just happened. I didn't know. I mean, there is a coordinated planned effort between all these people, and it's just par for the course for them.
Absolutely. Prolific pedophiles will structure their entire life.
Yes.
Their profession, their hobbies, their money, everything around having access to be able to abuse children. Yep. So one point I want to make before we wrap up is a huge part of this pattern, and the people that are not protecting are not the sexual predators, which I find absolutely amazing. So I encourage you to go read the story. And I know it's long. It was intended to be forensic in nature, to be able to hand the people who can fix this the information that they need. But there are some gentlemen in this. One, he's the superintendent of Frontier now, who, as Ashley Rowland was contacting these people as witnesses, she was finding other information that perhaps the superintendent now of Frontier was the third coach in the room. He's not accused of any crime, but would be a witness. Also, the superintendent of Shawnee currently clearly has some information, was one of these coaches back then in Little Axe. And the thing that is suspect here is when these perpetrators were stepping down from other places for reasons parents don't get to learn, these men hired them. Yeah. They hired them. Yeah. And then when they're confronted with the information, and in some recorded conversations that Rowland's had with these folks, they are trying to distance themselves. There are pictures of them coaching with these men again for years and years that they hired. So even those who are not the direct perpetrators, there seems to be a bro code within coaching that does not allow you to speak out against a coach who's acting criminally or inappropriately. And I encourage people to read those details and to understand who these people are and watch. There's scandal involved all around.
Well, this was, I hated this. I mean, I hate this.
I do too.
I mean, I wish I could say, oh, this was a really great article and I loved it. I don't. I hate it. I mean,
And in the comments, people are making great points. We need to be watching our youth pastors. We've had so many recent cases of that also. Any place that children are, they will come. They're talking about exactly what you said, Jenny, and this is why they want the porn-filled books in front of them early. If there are advocates all over the place for early sexualization of children, and those with their heads screwed on straights need to become advocates for innocence and brave and strong.
So people need to go look on Edmond Public Schools Facebook page, and you need to look for the video of Superintendent Angela Grunwald talking about how the awareness system just allows anything. And those two books, The Glass Castle and The Kite Runner, are the books that I had parents coming to me in 2014 about, that I actually wrote a national article in the Federalist about. So if you just Google Jenny White and the Federalist, you'll find the article that I wrote about Edmond Public Schools having these two books that parents were complaining about all the way back in 2014, Angela Grunwald. Oh, right? I mean, it's all out there to see. I didn't just make it up. It's actually written nationally in a national publication. So, I'm just done with these people. I mean, and the sad thing about it is so many people are just nice people. They're not me. They're nice people. They don't care if they offend somebody. I mean, I don't care at this point if I offend somebody like this. But most people don't want to offend anybody. They don't want to rock the boat. They're scared to lose their job. They're scared of being called out. They're scared. Well, here's the thing. If you're a Christian, you don't have anybody to fear but God. And frankly, I'd be way more scared of him than I would be scared of anything that anybody could do to me here. So if you know about something like this and you're scared, and you're a Christian, remember who your God is. Your God is super big, and your God wants protection for those children. And the only way that you can help is to realize that God's your strength, and you stand up and you make these people pay for what they're doing to children.
Yep. And if we don't protect them, who's going to? Who's going to if we don't do it?
Correct. And with that being said, I want to thank Ashley Rowland and all of the women. There are quite a few young women who have spoken to me, who've given their statements that were submitted to the OSDE. And I want to thank them. They are protectors of children of today, despite significant trauma. And I'm honored to tell their stories. We're going to have much more in part 2 and part 3 of this series. So stay buckled up.
So we have somebody asking if they go to V1SUT.com, can they find the articles?
It will forward from that website to the Substack, but the actual Substack is V1SUT.substack.com. And you will see everything there, and you will easily, this is front and center on the webpage.
Julia, fear not is not a suggestion. Amen. Amen. Got to have a little head wiggle with that one. All right.
As always, I thank you, Rope, for giving us a platform to let as many people as possible know about truth. It is our greatest weapon and protection.
Well, I thank you too, Mary, for making me mad. Thank you again for making me mad.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
We should be.
Another mind blower, but and I'll just say it again, if we as the adults don't step up and do something, then it's only going to get worse, and it's continuing to get worse. I mean, this was so few and far between 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now it's like at literally every district and somewhere you can find this pedophilic basically activity. And that's, it's serial perpetrators that, they know what they're doing.
Well, do you remember during the teacher walkout, we found out that there was a female teacher having sex with one of her students on the Capitol grounds? Remember that?
Yes, there was. And that was a junior high student. And then also the organizer of the online effort for the teachers walkout that got all the teachers fired up through Facebook and coming to the Capitol. He was convicted of forcible oral sodomy of a student, a junior high student. He was out of Stillwater Public Schools. So people don't always rise to the top of public education for the right reasons.
Nope.
Michael, you said it best. Accountability for the perpetrators, for the administrators, for the school boards, and for the higher agencies.
Yep.
And again, if you're a Christian and you're not reporting this, God's judgment will come on you too. Just saying.
Yep.
You're responsible too.
More coming. Look forward to talking to you next month on the third Wednesday. And I'm happy to connect you with our hero of this story, Ashley Rowland. I think it would be a great interview for you.
Yes, I really do think because there are parents who have come to us before, and said, but I just don't even know what to do. And I think somebody in a situation like that who's been in a situation who could say, look, here's what I did, blah, 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 blah. I just think that could not help her. I mean, I don't think that could be anything but just super helpful for parents and kids. And
well, the sense of empowerment that she could give these other victims that just are completely, destroyed. I mean, she could literally just empower these girls, and I mean that's what it's going to take, unfortunately.
Yep. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you guys, everybody who's watched us today. And yes, V1SUT will be back next month. And I assume that you're going to be continuing this particular
series. Absolutely. Yep. We have at least 2 more pieces, but with so many whistleblowers coming forward with this first piece coming out, it may be more.
Okay. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for being with us today. We'll be back on Friday, and we have Julianne Romanello, who will be back with us on Friday to talk to us about workforce initiatives in Oklahoma. So are we actually educating kids so that they can be educated and do what they want? Or are we, thank you, Julia, or are we training them for jobs because we want jobs to come here to create a tax base? So let's see what Julianne has to say for that. Really, really appreciate you again, Mary, for coming on. Just God bless you for all your work, and way to go.
Yeah.
Mrs. Rowland, good for you. And hopefully we'll be able to talk to you some more. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Then we'll see everybody on Friday, and you guys have a great day.
See you soon.
Thanks.